One of the arguments heard most often in the wake of the Paris attacks and being related to what is happening here in America is an opinion that most of the Muslims moving into Europe, the United States, Germany, and other civilized nations, no matter how hard they might try, they simply will not assimilate into their new surroundings. That the most important thing to them is not becoming part of their new community, but changing their new home to fit them. All right, is it that simple? Is that the beginning of a vicious cycle we find ourselves caught in once again? Let's find out. Our first guest is Assistant Professor of Political Science at UC San Diego and co-author of the book Why Muslim Integration Fails in Christian Heritage Societies, Claire Adida, joined by Executive Director of ORAM, the Organization for Refugee, Asylum, and Migration, Neil Grungras. I want to thank you both for joining us. And Claire, I'm going to begin with you on this one, seeing as you wrote this article here. It would seem that everything we have witnessed around the world fits that specific idea. We are told, we see that Muslims don't want to assimilate, but there's got to be a core reason why. What is it?
Right. Well, I think it's not as simple as saying that Muslims don't want to assimilate. The research that I've undertaken with some colleagues at Stanford University and at Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne in Paris shows that there is a vicious cycle to the failure of immigrant integration for Muslims, at least in France. And this vicious cycle comes from the fact that the Muslim societies in the Muslim communities in France do have some cultural differences, such as their degree of religious observance or their attitudes towards women, which tend to be more conservative, that can be threatening to the French society. As a result, the members of the French society tend to be threatened by this and act on these threats and do discriminate against Muslims by virtue of being Muslims.
All right.
And so.
Let me stop you there because you hit on a couple of points here, and I want Neil to get in on this too. Neil, that's what a lot of people do believe, whether it's America or Europe, is that specifically the Muslim faith wants to keep women down, wants to subjugate them, does not want to get along in Western society, and they also are completely intractable when it comes to their religion. Theirs is it, end of story. All right, how much of this do you think is real, and how much of it is just prejudice?
There's a lot of prejudice there. It really depends on where you're talking about, the size of the community, the origin of the community. Now, I'm not a great expert in integration, but the current debate is really about admitting 10,000 Syrians into the United States, most of whom are not Muslim fanatics. I mean, we're not talking about admitting any jihadists or any fanatics. And most of the people that we're talking about are actually people who were persecuted by the Islamic State. We're talking about people whose daughters were kidnapped and raped, people who are LGBT themselves, people who are opposed to religious fanaticism. So when we're talking about the current refugee crisis and whether or not we should admit these 10,000 Syrians, we really need to look at who exactly we're talking about.
So then, let me ask you this then. How do we then cut that difference? If we are going to bring them in, if we want to, then how do we get past this thinking? Because there are those who say that that is simply the way it is. That's why. And by the way, Neil, there's people here in America saying right now that we can't let them in because we don't know how many terrorists are coming in with them.
Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people saying that. Those people are not really giving a lot of credit to the American security system, which is the tightest security system in the world. Which is one that hasn't admitted any terrorists at all. It's a very large refugee system, and it's a system that has many, many agencies, many security agencies working on every single refugee application to make sure that no terrorists come in.
Let me stop you there a minute because I'm just short on time. I want to make sure we get in here. Claire, let me get to you then because you've looked at this. You've talked about the Muslim integration, which is what Americans, Europeans, a lot of people fear. How do we then get past this? I mean, is there a simple way to at least try to start ameliorating this and making it easier for the societies to get together, or is it impossible?
Yeah. No, it's not impossible. It's difficult, but it's not impossible. First of all, I just want to rectify something that you said. The cultural differences are minor cultural differences, not about subjugation of women. It's just about more conservative views towards women and just a slightly higher degree of religious observance. Now, for us to get out of this, we need to have action on the part of both sides. There needs to be a recognition on the part of French society that they are discriminating against Muslims because they are Muslims. And we need to deal with this at various levels. We need to deal with this in the labor market in terms of firms having discriminatory hiring practices. We need to deal with this in the educational system, which is very elitist in France.
Would you not admit, though, that it's difficult for people to understand when a certain group of people, such as Muslims, want their own zones, and it has to be specifically given to them in a society? 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by their own zones.
Well, they do have zones in Europe. They do have places where strictly you're not allowed in. They have Muslim areas in France where you're simply not allowed in. They give them their own communities. That gets people very scared.
No, I don't know about these communities. I think what you're talking about are the banlieues, the French suburbs where they live, which are very poor suburbs and very marginalized suburbs. I don't think they're asking for their own zones. I think they're asking for opportunities, just like any immigrant would.
So, Neil, then let's get to you. I got 30 seconds left. How do we solve this?
We need to look at the individuals that we're talking about. I mean, I believe we're talking about people coming to the U.S., people who are desperate and people who've lost everything in Syria. The phenomena of people coming to the U.S. is completely different from the European phenomena. In Europe, we've had hundreds of thousands of people walking in with no security clearances at all. In the U.S., we're talking about a very carefully supervised program to make sure that we know who each and every individual coming in is. And that's the way we do it. We work hard and we look one by one, and we make sure that the people that we're bringing in are the people that we want in the U.S.
That's a good way to put it. We do our due diligence as well. To remind everybody once again, Neil Grungras, the organization, go to ORAM, ORAM International.org. Claire Adida, promote the book. This is the one, Why Muslim Integration Fails. Also, you can read her article on the Washington Post. I want to thank you both for joining us. Stay with us. We're back on the Hard Line.